I feel like such a spoiled Death Battle fan right now, and I don't mind. Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and welcome back to another one of my Death Battle prediction videos. And next time on Death Battle, after Stitch vs. Rocket, we have Darth Vader from Star Wars versus Obito Uchiha from Naruto. For those of you guys who have watched some of my videos before, you'll know that I'm quite a big fan of this matchup. It didn't quite break my top 10 most wanted episodes ever, but honestly, after Stitch vs. Rocket got confirmed, this was a pretty big contender to be my new number 10. And while I didn't make that official decision before this point or anything like that, regardless, this was still a matchup I really wanted, and now we're getting it, so that's awesome. This was definitely my most wanted Darth Vader fight, and it was the Darth Vader fight that I figured we would get. You know, I didn't think Death Battle would pass up the opportunity to do another popular Naruto fight, and I do believe it's been long enough since Obi-Wan Kenobi vs. Kakashi to do this, especially considering the characters' different abilities and story beats, etc. I do think they are different enough. So I am very excited for this episode, obviously not to the extent that I was for Stitch vs. Rocket, but I'm still very excited. You know, I think the production could be so awesome on this one, so yeah, bring it on. So I'm not gonna lie, for this prediction, I don't really feel like I have much more to add to the already existing conversation. I will go into detail for the things that I think are really important, but overall this video is going to be looking more at the bigger picture because I feel like a lot of us already know where the debate really is here. As a whole, with of course some exceptions in the specifics, this fight really feels like one of those stats versus hacks fights. The reason why this feels so different from Obi-Wan Kenobi vs. Kakashi is because Obito has a lot of abilities that are different from Kakashi, and a lot of those pertain to various kinds of hacks. And of course, Vader is Vader, he's one of the strongest Force users kicking around. So unlike the last Star Wars vs. Naruto fight, this is a fight where both characters have impressive stats, and one character has a lot trickier abilities. Now, one weird thing that I keep hearing from a decent amount of people that are deeply ingrained in the community is quote-unquote, Vader wins the match, but Obito will win the episode. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not 100% sure where that specific notion is coming from. I think it's based on something that some of the researchers have said before, or something based on a blog that was written, or something along those lines. You know, I'm not 100% sure, but it is something I've heard quite a bit now, and you know, it does catch my attention, and it makes me inclined to think some things that may or may not happen. However, I'm not one to automatically choose a character winning just based on what Death Battle is more likely to do based on something that was said like once or twice before. You know, Death Battle can really change things up quickly on us. They are so unpredictable in so many ways these days. Like, I think we can all agree to that, you know? And also, it's just not as fun to go down that route to say like, oh yeah, based on this thing that was written one time or said one time, I just think Death Battle will go with this character regardless of the evidence. So I'm personally not going to go down that route, but that's just me. But back on topic to stats and such, even if we just compare Vader to the past Jedi that have been used on the show, then we know Death Battle sees these characters as being able to move anywhere from near light speed to hundreds of times light speed. Also, you know, being able to move a black hole versus being able to counter the destruction of a planet, etc., etc. You know, really powerful stuff. And even though Obito is definitely stronger than Kakashi is at his strongest, you know, I don't see Death Battle placing Obito at that kind of level to match that force power and defenses, at least in his base form. We'll get into the Ten Tails a little later. The only physical advantage that I could see Death Battle giving Obito over Vader is speed, just because for the last couple Star Wars episodes, Death Battle has placed Jedi and Sith at only around the light speed level, whereas, you know, for the top tier Naruto characters, you could easily make the argument for them being many times light speed. But even then, you know, I still think Vader should realistically be faster just based on realistic scaling. So I hope that Death Battle would go more in an Obi-Wan Kenobi approach and place Vader at that kind of level to illustrate that comparison. But that's just me. And usually when it comes to these kinds of debates, I tend to favor a stat advantage more than a hacks advantage, unless the character with the hacks has enough speed, durability, and or intelligence to properly employ those hacks in time. Vader potentially getting all of the stat edges is already not great for Obito, but let's take a look at what he's got before, we start jumping to conclusions or anything. While Vader could likely power through Obito's mental shenanigans regardless, Obito also has Izanagi, which makes him completely impervious for 5 minutes, the human path, which rips out souls, the Preda path, which absorbs energy, Kamui, the battlefield removal technique from his base form, the body and soul disintegrating truth-seeking orbs from the Ten Tails form, and more. And while it's not hacks per se, he does also have some wicked regeneration in his Ten Tails form, as well as some summons in general. It is important to remember that a fair amount of these offensive abilities require at least some form of physical contact with the target to work, which is great if Obito's speed is analyzed as being higher than Vader's, but not great if not. Not to mention, Vader also has his own really effective tricks, like being able to feed off of negative emotions that he could inflict on Obito through the Force itself, although it's a little hard to say whether or not Obito's mental resistances would extend to being able to defend against that. It's a little hard to say where that line is drawn, but still wanted to throw it out there. And Vader also can glimpse the future to get the rundown on Obito's trump cards and attempt to adapt to them beforehand. Also, there are some bases you can make, bases for arguments you can make for Vader being able to resist some of Obito's hacks, such as being able to survive Force Drain and Force Repulse, which were shown capable of targeting souls and disintegrating the target on an atomic level, respectively. Now, if we're looking at stuff like the Ten Tails form for Obito, he could potentially reach levels around or beyond planet level, similar to Madara. But I'm not inclined to think that that's enough, because to be honest, there is much higher scaling that exists in Star Wars when looking at the super high tier characters like Luke Skywalker, Emperor Palpatine, and even characters that are exclusive to the expanded universe or Legends or whatever, and that kind of scaling can reach past star level, possibly even up to solar system level, and massively faster than light speeds as well through reaction time, space travel alone, combined with precognition, etc., etc. And Darth Vader should at least be comparable to those kinds of stats. The issue, of course, though, is that Death Battle has never once placed any of their Star Wars combatants anywhere near those levels, but that scaling does exist nonetheless. There are characters in Star Wars who are capable of doing stuff like that. And if there's one character that they would introduce these kinds of numbers for, Vader is a pretty good candidate considering he's one of the most popular high-tier characters. And while they may not give out these exact numbers for Vader, the black pop-up tabs that have been appearing throughout Death Battle for however long, the longest time now, they have more recently been used to delve into the really high tier scaling for a lot of their combatants. So even if Death Battle doesn't verbally say this kind of scaling for Vader, if they do come to the conclusion that Vader can reach these kinds of levels, then they're not going to ignore that when it comes to the decision-making process behind the scenes. And even then, I could easily see them pulling a Madara versus Aizen and attributing numbers that are way higher than anything we've seen for any of the previous Star Wars characters to Vader in some capacity. Again, though, that's only if they come to the conclusion that Vader is that strong and is that fast. They may not even do that. So this is kind of where the issue lies. Obito's hacks and abilities are very clearly defined, and a lot of them would probably be very difficult, if not straight up impossible, for Vader to defend against, even if you could argue he could defend against some of them. They're also both very smart, very skilled, and crafty in their own ways. All of that is what's easy to understand. The hard part, though, is that I really feel like the outcome of this episode depends on how powerful Death Battle believes Vader is. If they place Vader at only around Yoda's level, like what they said for Yoda, which I don't think is likely, but if they do that, then I could easily see Obito being able to outpace Vader and being able to properly use his hacks and abilities. I could definitely buy that. If Death Battle places Vader more around Obi-Wan's levels, then I think it becomes really debatable, because Vader would probably be analyzed as being a lot faster and probably still at least a little stronger compared to Obito's best, but Obito still has a lot of strong abilities, that has not changed. If Death Battle places Vader significantly higher than any character they've used on the show before, which again, they could reasonably do based on the scaling that exists in Star Wars and based on Vader's role within the story, you know, him being one of the strongest Force users around, then I think Vader's physical ability is going to be too much for Obito, generally speaking. The thing that I keep going back to is that while we don't know for sure which numbers Death Battle will use for Vader, they were pretty insistent in Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Kakashi that scaling to Vader is like the most impressive thing a Jedi can do. So like in Madara versus Aizen, like I said before, I feel like we could be getting some of the highest numbers we've ever seen for a Star Wars character, you know, in this episode, and then compare Vader to some ridiculously high feats. I feel like that is possible. And then at that point, I feel like the stat gaps would be too much for Obito to handle and too much for him to be able to use his own advantages properly. A good number of Obito's hacks would certainly be effective against Vader no matter how you slice it, like no matter which resistances you can give to Vader, but even still, Obito would still need to be able to get the opportunity to use them, not just be skilled with them in a vacuum. You know, that description is not enough. Not to mention, Madara admitted that the Night Guy attack nearly killed him even when he was in the Ten-Tail state, implying that it is possible to kill someone with that level regen if the opponent is strong enough. Granted, you could chalk it up to some specific attribute that the 8th gate has, like being able to bend space, etc., but even then, as impressive as the regen is, I don't know if I see Death Battle saying that could hold up forever against that kind of stat difference. If they put Vader at weaker levels, which they very well could do, don't get me wrong, then I can definitely see the argument for Obito winning. Obito could definitely win. However, it's not like Obito's abilities or regen or even Izanagi would be able to overcome Vader's stats regardless of what those stats are. There's gonna be a point where the stats are gonna be too much for him, and I feel like Vader is gonna be given high enough scaling and high enough numbers to make it so that Obito can't overcome those stats more often than not. Especially if Vader does indeed have some resistances to some of Obito's hacks, which it seems like he very well could based on what I said before, and considering that Obito would need to catch Vader in order to use some of these hacks, such as, you know, touching his head for the human path or catching him with Kamui, I don't believe that hacks alone are enough to counter the stat difference that I think Vader and Obito very well could have and probably should have. Ultimately, this is just one idea for what Death Battle could do with Vader's stats, since it really does seem like the deciding factor here, but it is up in the air. But right now, I'm just going to stick with Vader. I think Obito has some really strong abilities, and he could certainly win depending on the numbers, as I've said many times before already, but I personally see it being more likely that Death Battle would place Vader at levels high enough to ensure him the win than they would be at placing him at levels low enough to ensure Obito the win. So right now I'm going with Vader, at least at this point in time, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. I know a lot of you guys hate me right now, so please let me know that down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, maybe even subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I do stuff like this all the time. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I am super excited for this episode. I think that no matter who wins, it's just going to be a fun time, a great production. I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, that's it for me. I will see all of you guys in the next video. Peace out.